everybody, my name is Bao and today I'm going to tell you about the amazing adventures of Ulysses S. Chapter 1. A Wooden Horse. Long ago, a Trojan prince stole Helen, a Greek princess. He took her to his city, Troy. At once, a Greek king named Ulysses S. sailed with many other Greek kings and their armies to rescue her in the Trojan horse. And the Trojan who hacks many people's wrecks their computers over there, Ulysses and the soldiers came face to face with the Trojans outside the city. The Greek men fought bravely. But the Trojan army wasn't their only problem. The city of Troy was protected by huge walls. The Greek armies fought the Trojans for a decade, but they couldn't get into Troy. After hundreds of battles and thousands of injuries, they still had rescued Helen. But Ulysses was not going to give up. He thought a cunning trick. The next day, the Trojans awoke to a surprise. Outside the city walls, the Greek camp had disappeared. In its place stood a wooden giant horse. A giant wooden horse. Every single one of the Greek ships had vanished too. We had won, shouted the people of Troy. They wheeled the wooden horse through the gates into the city and partied until midnight. Unknown to the Trojans, Ulysses and his men were hiding inside the horse. While everyone was sleeping, they climbed down a rope ladder. Then they crept to the city gates and opened them. Outside, the rest of the Greek army was waiting. The soldiers had sailed back to Troy in the dark of the night. When morning came, the city of Troy woke up in a nightmare. The Trojan men tried to fight, but the Greek soldiers killed them all. Then the Greeks stole all their treasure, set fire to the buildings, and rescued Helen. The war with Troy, the Trojan War, was over. But for Ulysses and his men, the adventures had just begun. Chapter 2, The Cyclops. The Greek kings shared out the treasures between them. Then all the ships set sail for home. But Ulysses and his men got lost. After 2 weeks out sea and they landed on the island to look for more food and water. All they had left to drink was some wine, which they took with them. At the top of a cliff, they found a cave. It was full of huge cheeses and vast buckets of milk. The man called out, but there was no answer. Let's go in and eat now, suggested Ulysses. Then we can wait for the owner. As they ate, a shadow fell on the men. They looked up and saw a one-eyed giant, a cyclops. He drove his sheep into the cave and rolled a rock across the entrance, blocking them in. His one enormous eye glared at the Greeks. "Who are you?" he roared. As Ulysses tried to explain, the cyclops snatched up 2 men, crushed them both in his fist, and ate them both. Then the cyclops gave a loud burp, lay down, and went to sleep. The man begged Ulysses to kill him before he ate them too. "No," said their wise king. "If I kill him, who's going to move that heavy rock and set us free?" Next day, a cyclops went out of the cave. He moved the heavy rock back to place, trapping the men inside. Ulysses and his men had to think fast. When the Cyclops returned, Ulysses offered him some wine. "What's your name?" asked the Cyclops. "Nobody," replied Ulysses, pouring out more wine. "What a funny name," laughed the Cyclops and fell asleep. Ulysses picked up a pole that he had sharpened and hid it. He heated the end in the fire. The man tiptoed toward the giant. They plunged the red-hot pole into his eye. Whoa. Cyclops roared out in pain. Everyone on the island rushed out to see what was wrong. "Nobody has hurt me," cried the Cyclops. "Nobody poked my eye out and I can see." "And nobody has hurt you. Then stop crying like a baby," said the other giants, walking away. Well, these giants do understand English. The blind and furious Cyclops rolled away the rock. He waited for the Greeks to come out, but Ulysses had already planned their escape. Each man was tied onto the belly of a sheep. All the Cyclops could feel was wool and horn. Too late. The giant had realized he had been tricked. Ulysses and his men had already escaped. Circe and her spells. The Greeks sailed away laughing, but they made a new enemy, the Cyclops' father, Poseidon. Poseidon was the god of the sea. He hated Ulysses and his crew for hurting his son. "They won't be laughing very long," he snarled. Soon, Ulysses' ship had landed on another island. Ulysses divided his men into two groups. One man, Telemachus, would lead half the crew in search of food and water. Ulysses would stay with the rest of the men to guard his ship. Telemachus and his men walked for hours. They couldn't find anything to eat or drink, and they didn't meet a soul. Finally, one of the men saw a wisp of smoke rising above the tree. The smoke led them into a palace and a beautiful woman. The woman led them into a grand hall. A feast was laid out on the table. "You're my guest," said the woman. "Please eat." Between mouthfuls, one man asked her name. "Caesar," she said, and filled the man's cup with wine. The Greeks ate, drank, and sang the wine. They did notice that Eurylochus wasn't there. He didn't trust Circe, so he was spying from outside. What happened next made him gasp in horror. One wave of Circe's magic wand turned the men into pigs. Eurylochus raced back to the ship. He told the others what had he seen. Without delay, Ulysses set off to rescue his friends. On the way, Hermes, who was the messenger for the gods, flew up to him. "The goddess Athene sent you this magic flower," he told Ulysses. "Eat it and you'll be safe from Circe's tricks." At the palace, Circe invited Ulysses inside for some wine. Behind his back, she poured some poison into his cup. Ulysses drank the wine. He wasn't afraid of Circe's magic. Then she tapped him with her wand. He jumped up. "You evil magic cannot harm me," he cried. "Now take me to my crew." Circe was scared. She led him to the pigsty right away. Circe smeared a potion onto the pig's snout. Magically, they changed back into men. The men were frightened of Circe, but she promised not to work any more magic on them. If she did, she knew Ulysses would kill her. She prepared a grand feast that lasted a year. The men from the ship came to join in too. When the men decided to go, Circe was very sad. She had fallen in love with Ulysses, but she gave them food and warned them of dangers that wait ahead. The bewitching sirens. The Greeks' next challenge was to sail past the Sirens' Island. This was trickier than it sounds. Yeah. The sirens were sea nymphs who bewitched passing sailors with their beautiful song. Men would sail closer and closer to the island until they wrecked their ships on the rocks and drowned. Circe had warned Ulysses about the sirens. He knew just what to do. Ulysses cut up pieces of beeswax and gave them to his men to use them as earplugs. But Ulysses wanted to hear what's so special about the sirens singing. He told his men to tie him tightly to the moss. While the sirens began to sing their delicious songs, only Ulysses was bewitched. "Untie me from the ropes," he pleaded. His crew just rolled on. They couldn't hear a thing. The sirens were astonished to see the Greek ship sail straight past their island. The whirlpool monster. When they thought they were safe, the crew unplugged their ears and untied their leader. Suddenly, there was a sound of angry water whooshing around. They were about to be sunk into a whirlpool. Pull harder, man. Yeah, Ulysses says. "Keep near the cliff." The men were so busy avoiding the whirlpool that they didn't notice a six-headed monster reached down from a cave in the cliff. The monster was named Scylla, and she was very hungry. So it tells me that the monster was a female. Each of her 6 necks stretched across the sea, and each mouth picked up a man. Whoa, that's not great. The man begged for help, but she swallowed them whole. The sea god's revenge. The terrified Greeks rowed away from Scylla as fast as they could. But a raging storm blew up and snapped the mast in two. Poseidon was getting his revenge. Then a giant wave flooded the ship, and all the men drowned except Ulysses. He clung to the broken mast and somehow reached the shore. Next morning, a princess found him collapsed on the sand. She took him to see her father, the king. Ulysses told the king about his adventures. "I will help you," promised the king. "One of my ships will take you home this evening." Ulysses fell asleep on the king's ship. When they reached his island, the sailors carried him to the beach. By that morning, Poseidon served in his chariot. Ulysses should have died in the storm. He grumbled, "I will punish those who helped him," and he turned the king's ship and its sailors into stone. home at last. For the first time in 20 years, Ulysses woke up on his home island. A lady was watching him. The goddess Athene. The goddess Athene, whispered Ulysses. You can't go home yet, she said. You've been away so long, everyone thinks you're dead. Many men are at the palace now. They want to marry your wife, Penelope, and kill your son, Telemachus. Athene had a plan. She gave Ulysses a disguise and sent him to the pig keeper's hut. The pig keeper thought Ulysses was a hungry beggar. He invited him in for some food and a chat. And he just chatted with Ulysses. Then Athene sent Ulysses' son, Prince Telemachus, to the same hut. When the pig keeper was out of the room, Athene used her magic to remove Ulysses' disguise. Telemachus was no longer looking at the beggar. He was looking at his father. Quickly, Ulysses and his son talked about how to save Penelope and his kingdom. The next day, Ulysses went to the palace with the pig keeper. Once again, he was in disguise. Ulysses pretended to beg inside the great hall. Dozens of men were feasting and boasting about who should marry Queen Penelope. They only gave Ulysses a few crumbs to eat. Go away, you smelly beggar, they said. When Queen Penelope heard there was a beggar in the palace, she asked the nurse to fetch him. Maybe he has news about Ulysses, she said to herself. Don't be sad, said Ulysses. Your husband is very close by. He hid his face so Penelope wouldn't recognize him. Suddenly, the goddess Athene put an idea into Penelope's head. That night, Ulysses slept on the floor of the great hall. Then, in the morning, the men arrived as usual. They were surprised when they saw Queen Penelope carrying Ulysses' bow. Gentlemen, she announced, I will marry the man who can use this bow. All he needs to do is shot an arrow through these 12 axes. She gave the bow to a servant and left the hall. All the men wanted to show their strength and win the queen. They tried, but none of them could even put the string on the bow. When the man gave up, Ulysses stepped forward. At first, the man laughed, but Ulysses didn't listen. He picked up the bow, put on the string, and fired an arrow straight through the axis. The man gasped as Athene changed back Ulysses' rags into his clothes. Ulysses and Telemachus fought all the men who wanted to steal their kingdom. The men tried to escape, but the doors were locked. Soon Ulysses and his son had executed them all. When Penelope heard what had happened, she rushed into the hall. Could this man really be Ulysses says? Maybe the gods were tricking her. Penelope thought of one last test. She asked the nurse to move the bed out of her room so this stranger could rest on it. But that's impossible, said Ulysses. I built that bedroom around a tall olive tree. The bed is part of the tree. Oh, Ulysses says, it is really you, said Penelope, smiling. After years of travel and trouble, the family was together at last. Goodbye.